we can get all excited about it.
I mean, my take on it is I haven't seen too many examples of brands utilizing it for sort of nefarious purposes. And generally speaking, when it's activated, it's usually on an individual sort of agree, sort of disagree kind of basis. In fact, just it's a very basic example, but is checking in at a location here on Foursquare here in Hong Kong. It asked me as I was navigating the city if I wanted to be made aware of deals as I physically moved through the city and sort of crossed different geographical boundaries. And I said, no. So, it was just, from my own sort of personal perspective, it wasn't something that was going to be important to me. And I think that, brands have the responsibility to be sort of in full disclosure. It's, notwithstanding, that there's certain legislation going on in different countries to sort of keep marketers and advertisers in check in terms of the data that's retained and how that's used.
I think it's a great point, right? Privacy is one of those strange things. We are comfortable with it, and yet we're not comfortable with it as consumers. And when we talk about consumers, we are also service providers in our day jobs. But in your case, you are okay checking in, so they know where you are. But you are not okay accepting the deals, right? So it's one of those weird things where we all each draw our own line. Adam, from your perspective, Microsoft, you guys are always engaged in this, one way or the other. How do you see it?
Yeah, I think the most important thing, privacy is a huge thing for us. We have a huge responsibility outside of our online and advertising business just because we produce software that is on, a large majority of machines that people use today. And therefore, we have a responsibility to make sure that those devices are protecting users and their data in the right way that they expect. I think the number one philosophy that we stay behind is you have to be able to put the consumer in control. So they have to be able to control when the information's used, how it's used, and to what extent they desire for it to be used. And you have to educate them on how to be in control as well. And you also, as a technology provider, need to make some tough calls on what do you produce in any kind of product or software experience that you're producing. What do you make available as default, and what do you make as non-default, and therefore the user then has to initiate. Our company made an interesting, I shouldn't say interesting, an important decision recently with the upcoming shipment of Windows 8. Windows 8 is going to be available in the market at the end of October, and it will come with an updated version of the Internet Explorer browser, IE10. IE10 will have a feature that's always been available in Internet Explorer called Do Not Track, simplified layman's term, but it's basically a track that essentially turns off any cookie tracking from destination websites visited by the user. This feature has always been available in IE. With IE10, we've made the decision that the default is turned on. So the user is going to have to take control to turn it off. Now, what this signal does is it basically sends a signal from the browser to the destination website or through applications that they might be using on the PC that says, do not track. Now, it's kind of up to the publisher as to how they respond to that. They could ignore it. That would be irresponsible, if you ask me. Or they could handle it in a certain restricted way. But at the end of the day, our goal was to, one, shift a little bit in terms of what's the default, and make sure that the way we communicate this to the advertising and marketing industry, as well as to consumers themselves, is to educate them on make sure how they can be in control. So putting the consumers in control at the end of the day. So.
What your views?
Yeah, I agree. Customers need to be in control. But I think also that we can turn it around. We can just, from a manufacturer or a brand perspective, we have to look at, well, what's the benefit we can provide in return for people sharing the personal data or the location. And in some cases, there are usage scenarios where that's going to make a huge difference. Just think of taxi services in Singapore, where if you phone them up, they know where you are, so they can tell you immediately, well, there's a taxi 2 minutes away. Perfect, no problem sharing location data there. So as long as we find the right use cases, it's not going to be a problem. The other thing I'd like to say is that I kind of have the feeling, although it's not supported by hard research, but I kind of have the feeling that the whole privacy and personality issue is much less of an issue in China than it is in Europe and in the US.
Much less of an issue.
Much less of an issue for consumers. And I think that is a cultural difference as well, where maybe related to the fact that people stepped over a couple of technology innovations and went straight to using social media. So, I mean, they're perfectly understanding that there is a trail of their past happening. What you do get is that there's a lot of Chinese people actually having dual profiles or multiple profiles and managing different lives. But I think that people seem to be slightly more open as well to sharing their interests in an open social network. There is a social network called Daoban, which is an open network which is interest-based. Very interesting. It's different in that sense from Facebook. You list your interest levels or your interest categories, and then it matches you up with people nearby or that have the same interest as you. So you can meet new people that share the same interest, which is a really interesting way of looking at it. And from a personality, a privacy issue, you're actually open on that. So you're sharing your full private life, and that has a value. Yeah. So that's the second thing. I think in Asia that, I'm not saying that this is less of an issue, but it's potentially, for Chinese consumers easier to accept.
No, I think you've got a great point, because I think often, as we look at media from a Western lens, we don't necessarily appreciate the cultural nuances as much, where the countries may be next to each other, but their way of thinking is completely different. But there's no question in my mind that our world is moving a lot towards permission-based. Whether you're going to create a service or a website, and if you're going to engage with somebody, whether they are customers or not, and you're going to collect data, it'll have to be a lot more permission-based, which also again leads to the fact that you'll have to collect more data, store more data, keep track of it, etc., and then apply privacy to this. And then it also puts tremendous pressure on consumers. Adam, from your example of the browser, I get it. But when you go to mobile, where we have I have 20 apps for example, from 20 different stores. I have to control each one of them, and I have to know how to work each service. These can be taxing issues. Not to say that these need to be resolved immediately, but I think that also shows that we are indeed in infancy stage. This is a 10, 20-year play, and that's how it's really going to pan out. So I think that was a great question on privacy. I think it's to be seen. Other questions relating to social, local, mobile commerce. I'm getting there.
No?
Anything on Twitter?
Yeah, anything on the Twitter side? Any questions or?
Not particularly. There's one in Spanish. That's not very useful to me. Who can read Spanish?
You can? You're Spanish. Please get closer to the screen and help us read the question.
But it could be from one of the other Social Media Week events.
Unless it was yours. Then you can just, you can just tell us.
Oh, it's gone. It's moved down. No, there was a Spanish one. It was further down.
Italian.
No, there's no Twitter questions.
All right. So just other questions from the audience. I just want to make one more point on privacy. My experience in marketing and running a marketing team for a publicly traded company is that half my battle was always fighting internally. You know, of course, clearly there were budgets, but there was also a lot of convincing the management team that we want to go to this direction. It will produce results, etc. And often it took, you know, half, if not the whole year away until we were into the next year cycle. But the reason I'm bringing this up is I think privacy is one of those issues. I think it'll be heavily debated. There will be salespeople who will standing up and saying, you know, I don't think we want to do this. So it's here to stay, and it's gonna be a while. Sorry, yeah.
We have a question.
I just wanted to ask how relevant is the checkout process, and you know how much sales are lost through that? Because I know some people get really annoyed when the checkout process just messes up and then you have to start again. So
There has been a lot lately about abandoned shopping carts in the various press. So I don't know.
I don't have any data or research to support that, other than just to say that looking for the opportunity to create a user experience that lowers the barrier for transaction is obviously needs to be a priority in the commerce series of events. But I don't really have any data that reflects that.
Well, the only thing I know is actually this is the way some of the payment providers market themselves. I mean, some of the payment methods that have user password authentication are quicker, are faster in the checkout process, because there's two elements that need to be checked. And in all the regular credit card payments, there are credit card expiry date, address, sometimes other checkpoints, and so and if you compare those two, there's less conversion with the regular credit cards than some of these online payment providers. So I do know that this is a kind of a contentious battle for the merchants around there. I think from the consumer perspective, it's not something that is really a big issue, because I mean, you do get a problem with your credit card sometimes, but it's not a huge thing. You're annoyed with that site, and you get your stuff elsewhere.
Just sorry to interrupt, but I think if it's a real issue, if you were talking from an online perspective, I think this speaks to the fact is that somebody's got to sit down and take a look at it as to what's really going on, you know, whether it requires research or watching it and collecting data or whatever. But I think it's an important point, you know, and that's why, in my opinion, you know, if companies are going to embrace, digital-based selling, they have to appreciate the fact that it's almost like being offline and somebody just having a shopping cart and just leaving it right there and walking out. You have to really understand. But I don't have any specific data to speak to that as well.
Is there any app or plugin for Facebook commerce?
Not that I'm aware of. Anybody aware of such a commerce? Chad, you?
No, I mean, I think actually Facebook has kind of stepped away from their f-commerce platform. But I think one of the things that might sort of address your question is, the adoption of near field communications and mobile wallet or mobile payment, right? So the way around a nasty shopping cart. This is obviously in more of a retail environment. I'm a big fan of like Starbucks, and I go right there and I've charged up my account, my rewards account, and I just wave the phone and grab my latte and I'm on my way. So just back to the earlier point about lowering the barriers to transaction. Certainly mobile wallet and those forms of mobile payment is one way to address that concern.
And at least from what I've seen, Starbucks appears to be one of the leading companies, whether they're using Square or using other technologies. They understand consumer engagement, or whether you like their approach or not, but I think they understand it.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is our learning is